He said it while I was chopping carrots. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not a dramatic moment. Not a fight that had been building all evening. Just me at the kitchen counter, knife in hand, making dinner the way I had made dinner 1,000 times before, and Jason walking in from the hallway still in his work clothes, and saying it like it was something he'd been holding for a while and had finally decided to put down. You're not even woman enough to stand up for yourself. The knife stopped moving. I didn't turn around immediately. I stood very still and let the words settle, the way you let something land before you decide what to do with it. Our daughter Mia was at the kitchen table behind me. 7 years old, working on a drawing, her felt-tip pen going quiet on the page. I knew she had heard it. I could feel the stillness that came over her. I turned around. Jason was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and that particular look on his face, the one that sat between contempt and challenge, daring me to react in a way he could dismiss. I looked at him steadily. I did not raise my voice. My name is Lila Monroe. I am 36 years old. And that was the last night I let him set the terms of who I was. After he left the room, I finished making dinner. Not because I wasn't angry. I was. The kind of anger that doesn't shake your hands, it steadies them. I chopped the rest of the carrots in clean, even strokes and put the pot on the stove and turned the heat to medium. Mia came to stand beside me at the counter. She was quiet for a moment, pressing her small shoulder against my arm. "Mom," she said. "I'm okay," I said. "I know," she said. "But are you really?" 7 years old and already asking the right questions. I looked down at her, her serious brown eyes, her pen-stained fingers, and something shifted in my chest. Not breaking. The opposite. Like something that had been loose finally finding its position. I crouched down to her level. "Yes," I said. "I really am." Later, after dinner, after Mia was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table alone with a glass of water and thought about what Jason had said. Not with hurt this time. With clarity. He had said it believing it would diminish me. That I would absorb it the way I had absorbed everything else, the interruptions, the corrections, the casual dismissals, and go quiet. He had said it in front of our daughter. That was the part one kept returning to. Whatever I did next would be something Mia remembered. The first time he dismissed me publicly, we had been married for 2 years. A friend's birthday party, a crowded living room, music turned low, the particular warmth of people who've known each other long enough to be comfortable. I had been talking about a charity project I wanted to start. A community literacy program. I had done research. I had a real plan. I was midway through explaining the funding model when Jason put his hand on my arm and laughed. "Leave the numbers to me," he said, turning to the group. "She's full of ideas. The execution is a different thing." The group laughed politely. Someone changed the subject. I smiled. I didn't argue. Didn't correct him. I filed it away in a part of myself that was patient, watching, not yet ready to do anything with what it observed. Over the years the moments accumulated. The charity project conversation. The dinner where he explained my own profession to someone I had worked with for a decade. The family gathering where he answered a question that had been directed at me. The habit, casual, constant, of speaking over me, around me, for me. None of it broke me. I want to be clear about that. None of it broke me. What it did was show me, slowly and completely, exactly who he was. And once you see something that clearly, you cannot unsee it. The month after the kitchen comment, I enrolled in 2 things. The first was a leadership development program offered through my workplace. My manager had mentioned it months earlier. I had put it aside because the schedule was full and Jason had opinions about evening commitments. Now I signed up without mentioning it. The second was an online financial planning course. 10 weeks, self-paced, with a focus on personal investment strategy. I did the modules after Mia was in bed, laptop open on the kitchen table, the house quiet around me. Jason worked late most evenings and came home tired. He ate whatever was in the fridge, watched something on his phone, and went to sleep. He didn't ask about my evenings and I didn't offer. This is important, and I want to say it plainly. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't scheming in any dark sense. I was simply redirecting the energy I had been spending on managing his comfort toward building something of my own. Every evening I spent studying felt like a door opening. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way real things open. By the end of the first month I had finished 4 modules of the financial course and attended 2 leadership sessions. My manager had noticed something shift in how I carried myself in meetings. She mentioned it in passing. I thanked her and kept going. The promotion came at the end of February. I had applied in January, quietly, without telling Jason, for a senior project lead role that had opened in my department. It was a stretch position, the kind that required making a case for yourself beyond your current job description. I made the case. The interview panel was 3 people. I prepared for 2 weeks. I researched every aspect of the role, anticipated every question, and walked in knowing that whatever they asked, I would answer from a position of genuine preparation rather than performed confidence. They offered it to me on a Thursday afternoon. I accepted, thanked them, went back to my desk, and sat for a few minutes just breathing. The salary increase was significant. Not enormous, but meaningful. More than meaningful. It was proof. Not to anyone else. To myself. That evening I made Mia's favorite dinner. Pasta with the sauce she liked, the one I only made on occasions. She asked what we were celebrating. Just a good day, I said. She accepted that with the easy trust of a child who doesn't yet know to look for what's underneath. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and thought about what came next. Jason had come home that evening talking about a difficult client. I had listened and responded and asked the right questions. I did not tell him about the promotion. Not yet. Jason had a particular circuit of social events, work dinners, neighborhood gatherings, the occasional party thrown by friends we had accumulated over the years of marriage. At these events he had a role he played consistently and well. The capable husband. The man who managed things. The person in the room who knew how the finances worked, how decisions got made, how the household functioned. I had always been the quiet half of the couple. The one who remembered people's names and asked about their children and kept the conversation going when it stalled. The support structure for his performance. I started watching these events differently. Not to expose anything. Just to observe accurately. To see what was actually happening rather than accepting the version of it that had been presented to me as normal. What I noticed was this: the people in these rooms were not as convinced by Jason's performance as he believed. Some of them glanced at me when he spoke about our finances or his management of things. Small glances. The kind that say, we see more than we're saying. I had been too absorbed in managing my own responses to notice those glances before. Now I saw them. And I began, very carefully, very naturally, to have real conversations. To let the person I actually was become visible in rooms where I had previously made myself small. The response surprised me. People were interested. My colleague Natalie had been watching for a while. We had worked in the same department for 3 years without becoming particularly close. Pleasant, collegial, occasionally eating lunch together. But something about the weeks following my promotion shifted things between us. She knocked on my office door one afternoon and sat down and said, simply, "I've been watching you the last few weeks. Something's changed." I looked at her. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Better than I've been in years," I said. She studied me for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to ask you something direct. Is there anything I can do to help?" Natalie was 12 years further into her career than I was. She had built a reputation in our industry that I respected completely. She was also someone who, I had observed, never wasted words. I told her the broad shape of what was happening. Not the personal details, just the direction. That I was building toward something. That I wanted to do it correctly. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I have some introductions to make. And some advice, if you want it." I wanted it. Over the next several weeks, Natalie became the most valuable professional relationship I had. Not because she did the work for me, she didn't. But because she pointed toward doors I hadn't known existed and gave me the language to open them. I was learning, fast, what I was capable of. Jason invited 4 couples to dinner on a Saturday in March. I cooked. I set the table. I made sure the wine was good and the conversation had somewhere to go. This was the role I had played at these dinners for years, and I played it again that night, but differently. Paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Jason was in his element. Easy, expansive, generous with opinions. He talked about his work, his instincts, the way he read situations. He talked about our household, the decisions made, the direction of things, in a way that centered him completely. I served the food and smiled and said the right things at the right moments. But something was different, and I think a few people in that room felt it, even if they couldn't name it. I was no longer absent from myself in the way I had been. The woman sitting at that table was present, alert, and watching with clear eyes. At one point, one of the guests, a woman named Fiona who worked in investment banking, asked me about a financial topic that had come up in conversation. Before Jason could redirect, I answered. Clearly. With specifics. With a confidence that was completely genuine because I had spent the last 8 weeks studying exactly this. Fiona's eyebrows rose slightly. Jason's expression shifted. Just for a second. A small recalibration happening behind his eyes. I picked up my wine glass and moved on. The private account came first. I had opened it the week after the kitchen comment, a personal savings account in my name alone, funded from my own income. This was not hidden in any legal sense. It was simply mine, which was something I had not had in years. The investment portfolio came 6 weeks later, after I had finished enough of the financial course to act with real knowledge rather than guesswork. Natalie had recommended a platform she used herself. I started modestly, amounts I could afford, choices I had researched. The consulting work came from a connection Natalie had made for me. A non-profit that needed strategic communication support. Small, part-time, completely legitimate. I did the work during lunch hours and evenings. None of this was a secret. If Jason had asked, I would have told him. He didn't ask. What he saw of my life was the surface that had always been there, the household running, Mia cared for, meals made, social obligations managed. He had no mental model for what else might be happening beneath that surface because he had never been curious enough to look. That lack of curiosity was his choice, repeated daily. By April, my personal financial position was measurably different from what it had been in January. By June, it was significantly stronger. I tracked everything carefully and said nothing. Mia was a noticing child. She had always been this way, quiet and observant, the kind of child who filed things away before responding. She got that from me, I thought. Or maybe we just recognized it in each other. One evening in April she came and sat beside me while I was working on my laptop at the kitchen table. She watched me for a while without speaking. "What are you doing?" she finally asked. "Working on something," I said. "You're always working on something now," she said. "Not a complaint. Just an observation. Is that okay?" I asked. She thought about it seriously. "Yeah," she said. "You seem happier." I looked at her. "I am." She leaned her head against my arm for a moment. Then she said, "You're really smart, Mom." It was a simple thing. A child noticing her mother. But it landed somewhere important. I had been building all of this for myself, for my own dignity, my own future, my own clarity about who I was. But I was also building it for her. For the version of herself she would construct partly from watching me. If she watched me stay small, she would learn that small was the correct size for a woman in this house. I was not going to teach her that. The charity gala was in early May. Jason's firm sponsored it annually. It was the kind of event that required dress clothes and careful conversation. Donors, executives, community figures. Jason treated it as a performance opportunity and prepared for it the way he prepared for anything that required an audience. I prepared differently this year. I had been asked by the event organizer, a woman I had connected with through Natalie's network, to sit on the guest advisory panel. A small role, but real. I had done preparatory reading on the charity's mission and financials. I knew the work. At one point during the cocktail hour conversation formed around me. 4 people asking genuine questions about the charity's community impact programs. I answered from knowledge. I asked good questions back. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and moved through exactly the kind of nuanced territory that requires both information and judgment. Jason appeared at the edge of the group midway through. He opened his mouth once to add something. No one redirected to him. The conversation was already moving and I was already part of its momentum. He stood there for a moment, wine glass in hand, and then excused himself. I didn't watch him go. When the conversation ended, one of the executives handed me her card and asked if I consulted. I do, I said. The speaking invitation came through the leadership program. It was a professional development conference. Not enormous, not televised, but serious. 300 attendees, a mix of industries, a focus on women in leadership. They wanted someone who could speak authentically about building professional identity under pressure. I said yes before I finished reading the email. I spent 3 weeks preparing. Not just the content, the presence. How I would stand, how I would pace, how I would hold silence before a key point. Natalie helped me practice. I did it in front of Mia twice, who gave me notes with the seriousness of a professional critic. Jason knew about the event. I had told him the basic facts. He had nodded and said it sounded like a good networking opportunity. That was all. On the day of the conference, I drove myself there alone. I sat backstage for 20 minutes before my slot and thought about the kitchen counter and the carrots and the specific quality of silence that had followed his words. Then I walked out. The room was full. The lights were brighter than I expected. I found my footing in the first 30 seconds, and from there it was just present, clear, honest. I talked about building under pressure. About the difference between patience and passivity. About what becomes possible when you stop performing smallness for someone else's comfort. When I finished, the room was very quiet for a second. Then it wasn't. I want to say something honest about this period. It was not straightforward. It was not a clean ascent from humiliation to triumph with nothing complicated in between. There were evenings when I sat in the kitchen after Mia was asleep and felt the weight of years of absorbed dismissal and wondered whether I had let too much time pass already. Whether the woman I was becoming had always been there, or whether I had built her from scratch. I think the honest answer is both. She had always been there. But she required conditions to grow. And the conditions inside this marriage had not been those conditions. What Jason had called weakness, my quietness, my patience, my careful observation, had actually been the exact qualities that made everything I was now doing possible. The discipline to build without announcing. The focus to work consistently without external validation. The ability to hold a long view while managing the immediate. These were not passive traits. They had never been passive. They were the architecture of everything. I did not feel grateful to him for the dismissal that had pushed me here. I want to be clear about that too. You don't thank someone for underestimating you. You simply use the space their underestimation creates. I had used it well. The consulting work expanded. The non-profit from Natalie's introduction led to 2 more clients through referrals, both small organizations, both needing the particular combination of strategic thinking and clear communication that I had spent years developing without realizing it had market value. I rearranged my schedule carefully. Early mornings before Mia woke up. Lunch hours. 2 evenings a week when I told Jason I had work commitments. He assumed it was office overflow. I did not correct him. The income was not transformative in the first months, but it was consistent, growing, and entirely under my control. Separate account. Separate records. Documented carefully. I also began, quietly, methodically, keeping records of something else. Not aggressively. Just accurately. A document on my personal laptop that noted dates, conversations, financial decisions Jason had made unilaterally with shared resources, instances of public dismissal. Not for use as a weapon. As a map. Because I had learned, from the financial course and from Natalie and from my own increasingly clear thinking, that clarity about your actual position is not optional. You cannot navigate accurately from a distorted map. I wanted an accurate map. By summer the picture it showed was clear enough that I had a consultation with a family law attorney. A single session. Informational. I came away knowing exactly where I stood. The school fundraiser happened on a Thursday evening in June. Mia's school. A community hall. Folding tables and homemade baked goods, and the low-level organized chaos of parents trying to raise money for a new library wing. The organizing committee had asked me in April if I would lead the communications and media outreach effort. I had said yes. I had spent 6 weeks building a plan: social media, local press, a donor appeal letter, a short video that told the story of the school's history. By the night of the event, we had raised 40% more than the previous year's total. The principal made a brief speech that included my name. The local paper sent a photographer who wanted a quote. I gave the quote. Jason was there. He had come to support, he said, and he stood near the baked goods table with a polite expression and a cup of coffee. At one point he tried to join a conversation I was having with 2 journalists and a board member. He made a comment about the fundraiser's success that implied he had been part of the organizing effort. I did not contradict him directly. But the board member looked at me and said, "Lila, this was really all you. The committee said so." I smiled at her. "It was a team effort," I said. I watched Jason process that. He organized a weekend away with another couple in July. A lake house belonging to friends, 2 days, very relaxed in theory, the kind of trip where everyone talks too much and eats too well and comes back slightly tired and more connected than before. Jason was in his element on these trips. The easy authority of a man on his own turf, or close enough to it. He talked about the house, the lake, the plans. He told a long story about a business decision at dinner that night, a story I had heard before told slightly differently. I sat across from him at the table and listened and thought about the consulting proposal I had submitted that morning before we left. A mid-sized non-profit. Real scope. Real fees. They had confirmed receipt and said they would respond within the week. I thought about the financial course I had completed. The investment account that was growing steadily. The connections I had made through Natalie's introductions. The woman who had handed me her card at the charity gala and emailed me twice since. I thought about Mia at home with her grandparents, drawing her pictures, asking her sharp questions, watching and filing. I was sitting at that table, but I was not small in that table anymore. Whatever illusion Jason had of where I stood, it had been accurate once. It was not accurate now. And the gap between the real version and his version was widening every week. The lake was dark and still outside the window. I helped clear the plates and went to bed at a reasonable hour. In August, he tried to take credit for the charity initiative. The organization I had been supporting through my consulting work had won a small regional award, a community leadership recognition that came with a brief profile in a local business publication. My name was mentioned. My work was described specifically. Jason read the article. That evening he brought it up at dinner with neighbors who had dropped by, casual, social, the way he handled most things that required management. He mentioned the initiative. He said we had been involved. He said it had been something they were both proud of. One of the neighbors, a woman named Diane who had been at the charity gala in May, looked at me with an expression I recognized. "Lila," she said, "you really drove that whole thing, didn't you?" "I was deeply involved," I said simply. "She's too modest," Jason said, smiling. Diane looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at me. "I don't think modesty is quite the right word," she said pleasantly. The conversation moved on. But something had shifted in the air of the room, a small, clean shift, the kind that happens when an accurate version of events displaces a managed one. Jason refilled his glass and changed the subject. I watched him do it and felt something I can only describe as patience arriving at its natural end. September brought a change in his behavior I had been half expecting. He became watchful. Not openly suspicious, he didn't have the vocabulary for that, because acknowledging what I had become would require acknowledging what he had assumed, and that was a confrontation with himself he wasn't ready for. But watchful. He started asking occasional questions about my schedule. Casual, framed as interest. Late night. When I came to bed after working. What was that call? When I took something in the other room. I answered everything honestly. Client work. Leadership committee. Natalie, about a project. None of it was anything he could dispute. All of it was simply my actual life, which he had never been curious about until it started taking up space he had assumed was empty. I noticed he had started looking at me differently at social events. Less like a prop. More like a variable. Something that needed to be accounted for rather than simply managed. I found this interesting. Not threatening. Not satisfying in a cruel way. Just genuinely interesting. The way it's interesting to watch something you built finally performing at the level you designed it for. Because that's what this was. I had built something. Not against him. For myself. And it was now performing at full capacity. He just hadn't gotten the memo that the design had changed. Mia told him in October. We were at the kitchen table for dinner. The three of us, a Tuesday evening, ordinary in every visible way. Mia was talking about a school project on community leaders. She had been asked to profile someone she admired. I'm writing about Mom, she said. Jason looked up from his plate. Mom does consulting for non-profits and she gives speeches and she's really good at helping people figure out their plans, Mia continued, with the focused delivery of someone who has been preparing this. My teacher said it sounds very impressive. She looked at me. You are impressive, she said simply. The table was quiet for a moment. I said, thank you, Mia. Jason set his fork down. He looked at Mia. He looked at me. Something moved through his expression that I had not seen before, not anger, not the contempt I had become familiar with. Something quieter. Uncertainty. I had seen uncertainty in him before, briefly, at the charity gala, at the fundraiser, in small moments where the version of me in his mind had failed to match what he was looking at. But this was different. This was his daughter telling him something he had not known and clearly should have. I picked up my water glass and did not fill the silence. The media request came in November. A regional news segment on community impact leaders. Someone from the non-profit award team had passed my name along. The producer emailed me directly asking for a brief interview. I agreed. The segment filmed on a Thursday morning. 20 minutes in a conference room. Clean and straightforward. The producer asked good questions. I gave answers I meant. The segment aired the following week. I mentioned it to Jason the day before it aired because it would have been stranger not to. He went quiet for a moment when I told him. Then he said he would watch it. The evening it aired, we sat in the living room, Mia between us on the couch, Jason in the armchair he always occupied. The segment was 4 minutes long. The producer had used a particular section where I talked about quiet leadership, about doing work that matters without requiring the room to notice. When it ended, Mia immediately said, "That was you, Mom. That was exactly you." I nodded. Jason said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You didn't tell me you were doing all of this." "You didn't ask," I said. It was not said with cruelty. It was the most accurate sentence I could offer. He sat with it for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and I picked up mine and Mia fell asleep between us on the couch. By December people had shifted. Not dramatically. This was not a moment where everyone gathered to applaud and Jason was publicly shamed in some theatrical way. Real life doesn't work like that. What happens in real life is smaller and, I think, more true. What happened was that people stopped positioning themselves toward him when I was in the room. At social events, conversations oriented differently. Questions came to me. Eye contact found me first. The particular currency of social attention, which had always flowed toward Jason by default in rooms we shared, redistributed itself according to something more accurate. He felt it. I could see him feel it in the way he positioned himself, the subtle adjustments of a person used to owning a room recalibrating for a room that was no longer entirely his. At a neighborhood holiday gathering, a man I barely knew came to find me specifically to ask about the non-profit work. He had read the news segment. He had a friend running a small foundation and thought I might be a resource. We talked for 15 minutes in a corner of the room while Jason circulated elsewhere. Afterward, driving home, Mia fell asleep in the back seat. Jason was quiet for a while. Then he said, "People respect you." "Yes," I said. Just that. I told him about the investments in January. Not as a reveal. Not staged for effect. We were doing a practical review of household finances, The kind of annual accounting that had always been mostly his territory, and I brought my personal portfolio into the conversation because it was now relevant to any accurate picture of our financial position. I showed him the numbers. He was quiet for a long time. "When did you start this?" he asked. "January of last year," I said. He looked at the screen. At the figures. At the documented history of 12 months of careful, consistent decision-making. "This is significant," he said. "Yes," I said. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said. Again. Gently. Just accurately. He sat back in his chair. I watched him do the calculation I knew he was doing. The one where he tried to reconcile the woman in front of him with the woman he had thought he was married to. Tried to map the distance between those two versions and understand when the divergence had begun. The divergence had not begun. That was the thing he would never fully understand. The woman in front of him had always been there. He had simply never looked. I did not explain this. Some things land more fully when they are arrived at rather than delivered. The conversation happened at his parents' house in February. An extended family dinner, his parents, his brother and sister-in-law, a cousin visiting from out of town. The kind of gathering where everyone falls into their usual roles and the evening moves along its familiar grooves. Partway through dinner, his father asked about a financial matter, something to do with a property investment in the family. Jason began answering. The answer was incomplete, and I knew it was incomplete because I had been researching exactly this area for a client whose situation had similar parameters. I waited for a natural pause. Then I added the piece that was missing. Clearly. With specifics. With the particular confidence that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. The table went quiet for a moment. Jason's father looked at me. "Where did you learn all that?" "I've been doing a lot of financial study this past year," I said. "And I've been working with several non-profits on their financial structures. It overlaps more than you'd think." His father nodded slowly. "You should have been the one I called when this came up last spring." He wasn't being unkind to Jason. He was simply being accurate. Jason ate his dinner quietly for the next few minutes. His sister-in-law caught my eye across the table and smiled. He came to me 2 weeks after that dinner. A Sunday morning, Mia at her friend's house, the house quiet. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same kitchen, but not the same morning it had been when he said what he said 14 months earlier. He had the particular look of someone who had been preparing something and was not sure how it would land. "I've been thinking," he said, "about a lot of things." I waited. "I said something to you. In this kitchen. About you not being woman enough." He looked at the table. "I've been thinking about that." "I know," I said. "I was wrong." He looked up. Not just wrong in the way of saying something cruel. Wrong in the way of not seeing you. For a long time. I held his gaze. "I know what I've built," I said quietly. "I built it for myself. Not to prove something to you." "I know that now," he said. We sat with that for a moment. I did not offer reassurance. I did not rush to smooth over the distance between us with comfort he hadn't earned yet. But I did not close the door either. Some things require time to understand. The question was whether he was willing to do the work of understanding. That was a question only time would answer. Spring came and the house felt different. Not transformed. Real change is rarely transformation. It's accumulation. Slow, consistent, grain by grain, until one day you look at the pile and realize it has become something substantial. I had a full client roster. 3 non-profits on retainer. 2 new projects in negotiation. The investment portfolio was growing steadily. The leadership program had asked me to join their advisory board. Natalie and I had lunch every other week and talked about the future the way 2 people talk when they believe it is genuinely open. Mia had submitted her community leader profile at school. She got the highest mark in her class. Her teacher had written in the comments, "Clear-eyed, specific, and genuinely moving." I kept the paper on my desk. Jason was different. Not remade. People don't remake themselves quickly or cleanly. But trying. Asking questions he hadn't asked before. Being present in the kitchen in the evenings instead of disappearing into his phone. coming to me as events and watching rather than performing. Whether it was enough, whether it would be enough, I held that question openly. Not with dread. With the same patient, clear-eyed attention I had learned to bring to everything that mattered. On a Tuesday evening in March, I sat on the back porch while Mia did her homework inside and the last light of the day moved across the garden. I thought about a knife and carrots and a word that had been meant to diminish me. I thought about everything that had grown from that moment. You're not even woman enough. I thought about what enough meant. And what woman meant. And who got to define either. I smiled to myself in the quiet evening. Then I went inside to help my daughter with her homework.